What's up, guys? We are back for another episode of Katson's Corner. Here to talk about the week of college football that we experienced on Saturday, as well as previewing the week ahead. Because, as we all know, it is over. It has never been more over than it is right now. The Chargers lost to the Dolphins on Sunday, which means that it's time to start thinking about the draft because it has never been more over than it is right now. Just joking, of course. It's a long season. I personally am optimistic that things will get turned around, although obviously the defense is a huge problem. We'll talk about some guys that could potentially come in to fix that unit starting next year in today's episode. Before we get started, make sure that you guys are subscribed to the channel, of course. Steven, Tyler, Alex, both me and Insdorf and Arjun are, of course, on every single day, providing you 7 days a week of coverage, talking about the Chargers from all the different angles that we specialize in. So we appreciate all your guys' support. It's the reason that I have a platform on here because you guys respond positively when I'm on, and so they haven't kicked me off yet. So do appreciate that. Also, if you are interested in more of my analysis outside of this video and everything, you can always find me on Twitter at Alex Katson. It's just my name, the exact same way it's spelled on the screen there. I write for Chargers Wire, if you don't know already. So that's where like all of my Chargers focused stuff is. My draft stuff is mostly on here, but it's kind of scattered around. I'm a lot of different places, a lot of different times, all over on Twitter. So that's the best place to find all the stuff that I'm doing. Without further ado, we will get into this week's uh, set of prospects. We have a few guys to talk about this week. The Chargers had a much lighter visit week this week. If you watch the week one episode, you may remember that the Chargers were at 6 or 7 different college football games that week. Only 2 this week that I could find were reported anywhere. There's a few different reasons for this, like we talked about in the last episode. That Labor Day weekend, especially with the games all spread out over that long weekend where we had games from Friday all the way until Monday. It's a lot easier to get people out on scouting trips. There's not a Chargers game to worry about. Obviously, with the Dolphins game on Sunday, it's a little bit, you want to keep a few of you guys in house for that. It's a lot easier to send out your GM, for example, to a game when there is not a Chargers game happening. And so only 2 games this week. It's probably going to be more what the norm is going forward. Um, so they did go to Notre Dame versus North Carolina State, which was at North Carolina State, as well as Illinois at Kansas. And we'll talk about 4 prospects each from those schools. Go pretty quick through those just to kind of give you guys a little bit of background information on those guys, people that maybe the Chargers should keep an eye on. Obviously, draft is still 6, 7 months away, and so there's a lot that can and will change. A lot of these guys may not even end up in the draft because they'll end up going back to school. But it's always good to kind of get a baseline understanding of those guys. We'll do that for the next month or 2 here, and then as we get a little bit closer to the winter and all-star game invites start going out and everything like that, start getting all those declarations and everything, then we'll start talking about some guys a little bit more in depth. Um, we will start with Tom Telesco's favorite school of all time, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Obviously, if you've been following the Chargers for long enough, you know that Notre Dame is a favorite of Chargers draft picks. Jerry Tillery, Alohi Gilman. There's a handful of other ones. It seems like every Notre Dame prospect is always linked to the Chargers in some way or another, whether they are seriously interested or not, just because it's become a little bit of a meme on Chargers Twitter. Um, they did go to the Notre Dame game this weekend, of course. And so I think the guy that they're probably primarily there for is corner Cam Hart, who you see in the top left there, number 5. Um, He's a bigger physical corner, kind of matches the prototype that the Chargers like in their DBs under Brandon Staley. Um, He is a team captain, which has always been a big deal for the Chargers under Telesco. They really, really hone in on those team leader type players, um, kind of build that locker room culture. Um, Hart is a former wide receiver. He came into Notre Dame as a wide receiver in year one, only played 3 snaps, I think, then moved over to corner because that receiver room was just too crowded when he first got there. Has really stepped into his own at corner. He's on the freaks list this year. One of those just like super, super good athletes, former wide receivers that helps him with route timing and everything. He got a fourth or fifth round grade, kind of in that like early day 3 area this summer, which is also partially why he is in this draft and not the draft that happened in April, because he probably didn't like that feedback so much. So he's going back and trying to pump up that stock a little bit. I thought he had a decent game against North Carolina State. It was one of those games that got affected really heavily by the weather delay, and so it's kind of in and out of that one, just because it took I think 6 to 8 hours to actually finish. So I was kind of at that point moving on to other stuff. Um, Notre Dame also has a 3-5 tech edge, kind of play him anywhere you want on the defensive line guy, in Riley Mills, number 99 there, who is also on the freaks list. He's someone that got a 7th round grade from the scouting services over the summer. So one of those guys that is kind of more tools than player right now. There's some question about where exactly he's going to play in the NFL. Like I said, he's kind of versatile between like 3 tech, 5 tech. You can move him out all the way to edge if you want. Um, Almost kind of like a Michael Hoyt type player for the Rams, where he's just like he's a super big dude out on the edge, but he's kind of undersized in the middle, and so you don't really know where to play him, and he's kind of a weird fit for an NFL defensive line. Hoyt ended up going undrafted, but he was also from a D2 school, I think. So Mills will probably get a shot like, late in the draft. Will probably be a guy that needs to contribute on special teams in some fashion to stick on a roster. But he's an interesting player, really good athlete. I think someone to keep an eye on to add to that defensive line rotation. Next, we've got running back Audric Estime. He is so much fun to watch. If you've not caught any Notre Dame games this season, Estime has had a huge run in all 3 of their games so far, where he just takes a carry right up the middle and just like bursts through for like 60, 70 yards and a touchdown. And it's incredible. He's 5'11", 227, so he's just built like a rock. Um, he's, but despite that, he's got really smooth feet. I actually really like his footwork, especially behind the line of scrimmage, kind of staying patient for those blocks. A little bit more of a power runner. He's someone that's going to run through you, not around you. I think he's someone that is an interesting name to keep an eye on for the Chargers in particular because of the way that we saw the run game change under Kellen Moore this week against the Dolphins. There's a lot more emphasis on kind of duo, inside zone runs, those runs that are like really hitting you quick up the middle, less horizontal action like we saw under Joe Lombardi last season. With Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly both pending free agents this season, you might want to turn to an option that's going to be cheaper. Estime is going to be available in the middle rounds probably. He's not like a huge threat out of the in the pass game. Not a great pass blocker, just kind of like a guy that's going to come in and be kind of a short yardage goal line back to start with in the NFL. So potentially someone you can get kind of in that like 4th, 5th round range where Telesco loves to take his running backs. But I think someone that would really be able to execute the exact concepts that the Chargers have been running, or at least look like they're going to be running based on week 1, really, really well. And so someone that might just fit perfectly into that offense. And then we've also got edge rusher Javonte Jean-Baptiste. He's in his first season at Notre Dame. He transferred in from Ohio State. Went to Ohio State as a 4-star recruit, was a top 250 recruit in the country. Things never really panned out for him there. He was kind of stuck behind all of those talented edge rushers that Ohio State has had that are now in the league. Got washed out a little bit by JT Tuimalau and Jack Sawyer last season. And so now he's at Notre Dame. He's another just like freak athlete. Is the third guy from Notre Dame on the freaks list that we've talked about out of four. Um, kind of similar to Mills in the sense that, like, he's a very flashy athlete, super toolsy, but, like, doesn't necessarily have, like, the production numbers to back up, like, this is an NFL caliber player. Certainly an NFL caliber athlete, but, this it at this point, it's his 6th college season. He's probably gonna be a guy that needs to carve out a role as a UDFA. He did get a 7th round grade over the summer from the scouting services, but keep in mind that the scouting services only typically grade, seniors and, like, notable juniors. And so there's a lot of guys who are going to end up in the draft and end up having, just really strong senior seasons and everything, or really strong junior seasons that kind of push those guys a little bit further down the board. So 7th round grade over the summer does not necessarily mean you're going to get drafted. I think Jean Baptiste is going to be one of those guys that gets washed out and ends up signing as a UDFA. But one of those guys who would not be surprised if he ends up making a roster as a UDFA, making a practice squad, just because he's got a ton of experience. He's clearly an NFL caliber athlete, just hasn't quite put it all together yet, for whatever reason. Moving on to North Carolina State. This is actually a school that we talked about last week as well, because the Chargers were at the North Carolina State game last week too, which is kind of interesting, something to keep an eye on. I believe that was their game against UConn, I want to say. It was one of those. They were there. So we did talk about two guys for North Carolina State last week, tight end Trent Penix and corner Shaheem Battle. If you want a little bit more info on those guys, you can go back to the week 1 episode and find that. We're not going to talk about those guys again because, again, we want to kind of get you a little bit of background information on all these different prospects. And then as we get deeper into draft season, we'll hone in a little bit and focus in on some guys that the Chargers may actually be targeting. Um, we're going to talk about some guys for North Carolina State here that I don't necessarily think are going to be like super high up on the Chargers board, but are just like notable names to know, as we get into the winter and everything. Maybe they end up on a rival team, maybe they end up, somewhere notable in the league or something. It's always good to keep an eye on those guys still. Um, First one here is guard Dylan McMahon, another freaks list guy. He's got a 32-inch vertical, which should tell you just how explosive he is, as a 305-pound guard. Jumped 32 inches. That's pretty good. Pretty good, I would say. Um, He's a lot more agile than 6'4", 305 pounds would suggest. Really decent puller, really nice mover in space, honestly. Kind of a pleasant surprise when you watch him on film. I think he's going to be someone that is going to be in the more like middle to late rounds, probably. But can play guard. I think he's played a little bit of center, maybe. But someone who's probably going to be a guard in the NFL might add some nice depth for the Chargers, especially with how much polling they've introduced under Kellen Moore. Might be a guy that just goes somewhere else that utilizes him a little bit better as well. Linebacker Peyton Wilson, you can maybe see on in that picture in the top right, he's got the C on his chest. It's another team captain that we're talking about. He's a 6th-year senior. He's had like 3 or 4 seasons that have just been cut short by injury. Just a super unfortunate college career for him. Super talented, another freak athlete. I think he's on the freaks list. Has always been like a really, really nice mover. Has like 4.4 or 4.5 speed, I think, from linebacker, if I remember correctly, which if you watch the Dolphins game that just happened, would be very good for the Chargers to have, probably, given the way that Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray guarded the middle of the field and got out to the boundaries against that pre-snap motion for Miami. There are a couple red flags with Wilson. Obviously, the injury history is going to be a big concern. 6-year senior coming out, so he's going to be an older rookie. He does have an arrest under his belt. It's back from 2019, I think it is. It's for underage drinking, of all things. He got nicked for drinking when he was 19, ran away from the cops and everything. That's something he's going to have to answer for at the combine interview. Normally, I would say that that's probably a guy that the Chargers are just like completely taking him off his board. But under Staley, they've softened on that stance a little bit. The only reason that I say that is because J.C. Jackson is on this team, and he got arrested when he was in college at Maryland, and went to the Patriots and had a clean bill, had a clean record there. So, Chargers were comfortable enough with that history. Same thing with Wilson. It happened a while ago. He's a team captain now. He's probably moved past that sort of thing, but still something he's going to have to answer questions about, I'm sure, in those NFL interview rooms. So, someone to keep an eye on, just like athletically wise, may or may not end up on the Chargers' final board. I kind of lean towards no, but if he does, don't be surprised. Um, Davin Van is another kind of like Riley Mills-esque player, is kind of like a 3 tech, 5 tech edge kind of hybrid guy. If you're still struggling to kind of picture what that guy looks like, basically picture Morgan Fox, but then like make him a college player who is questionably a good NFL player or not. And that's who I'm talking about. Um, Van is more of like the 5 tech edge archetype than a 3 tech. I don't really think you want to move him all the way that far inside. He had a big game against North Carolina last season. Had like 5 tackles, a couple pressures, some passes batted down. So stepped up in a big, on a big stage. Going up against Drake May and that UNC team last season in a rivalry game. That's something that doesn't seem like it should be like a huge deal necessarily, but NFL scouts are always going to keep an eye on how you step up in big moments like that, because there are plenty of them to go around in the NFL. So someone to keep an eye on. I think he's going to be another guy that's going to be like a 6'7" UDFA type range guy, but another just kind of like versatile body on the defensive line, another guy that might be good, kind of just like in the back end of that rotation to kind of like provide depth at a couple different spots. And then last guy we're going to talk about for NC State is tackle Anthony Belton, who I really like a lot as kind of like a quote unquote sleeper name, I guess you would call it, in this draft class. Obviously, there's a lot of attention around like Olu Fashanu from Penn State and Joe Alt from Notre Dame, who we didn't talk about because the Chargers don't need an offensive tackle. And guys like that. Belton, again, not going to be someone that the Chargers are targeting really. He got a second round grade this summer, and is one of those guys where just like the NFL is already on him, the media is not. The media is gonna get on him in December, January, February, March when he's at the combine and pro days and does interviews and everything. And more and more people start getting the leaks from their NFL sources that like, oh, this is a guy that everyone really likes, and he's gonna be a second or third round. He's gonna be kind of in that day 2 range. So when that happens, because it's going to happen, I'm telling you right now that that's going to happen, because he got a second round grade this summer and he's played well this season so far. When that happens, you can come back to this video. You can say, wow, hey, I already know who that is because we talked about him in September. So someone to keep an eye on. He's one of those guys that just is a very coordinated athlete. He's got a lot of natural power. He's got a lot of length. That combination usually goes well for offensive tackles transitioning from college to the pros. He's someone that I really like a lot. Like I said, not going to be someone that the Chargers are targeting. Obviously, Rashawn Slater and Trey Pipkins locked up for the foreseeable future. Not really going to be an area where not really going to be available in an area of the draft where you're going to be targeting him as a depth piece. So probably going to be a guy that goes to another team. But someone that I'm kind of throwing out there as a name for you guys to learn, so that if he goes to an AFC West rival, for example, we can all be mad together about it because he's going to be good. Moving on to that Illinois-Kansas matchup, we're going to talk about some guys from Illinois. First one here is corner Tavion Nicholson. He was actually the corner 2 next to Devin Witherspoon last season, before a injury. I believe it was a fractured wrist, dislocated wrist, some sort of arm injury. Knocked him out for the rest of the season. Missed a lot of time. He's back this year. He's Illinois' corner 1. Plays really similar to Witherspoon, honestly. Very physical press corner. I think the biggest difference, and it's what creates such a gulf between him and Witherspoon as a prospect, is Nicholson's awareness just isn't nearly as good. There's a lot of plays where he's early. There's a lot of plays where he's late. There's a lot of plays where he's grabbing right in front of an official. There's a lot of stuff that like Witherspoon is a little bit better about getting away with, or just like seeing, that Nicholson just isn't quite there yet. Still someone that I like. He's another corner that kind of fits the prototype that the Chargers want of like that big physical press corner. Um, could be a guy that kicks into the slot just like Witherspoon is in Seattle, from all the reporting that I've read at least. Um, Gonna have a lot of eyes on him, especially once Big Ten conference play starts. There's a lot of good receivers that he's going to be tasked with shutting down. I don't necessarily think that it's going to go the same way that it went for Witherspoon last year. There's a new defensive coordinator. Illinois lost a lot of talent on that defense. They're just like not as good of a team as they were last year, but still someone to keep an eye on, kind of a mid-round corner, flesh out that room a little bit, especially because we still don't really know what that corner room looks like going past this season. Isaiah Williams is a fun little slot receiver project. Came into Illinois as a quarterback. Started, I think, 3 or 4 games during the COVID season. Was pretty decent. Was mostly a wildcat guy. One of those kind of college guys. Think like Lynn Bowden at Kentucky, where it's like technically he's a quarterback, but really he's just a wildcat guy, and they're running a bunch of option. And like if he happens to throw it every now and then, like cool. If it works, then great. And if it doesn't work, then like, well, he's not really a quarterback, and so we can get away with it. Moved to wide receiver when Illinois got some like actual quarterbacks into the room. Um, Someone who has just a lot of speed from the slot, is a team captain again, as we've talked about, important thing for the Chargers. Just has a really good feel for the game, which is really impressive when you consider that he's only been playing receiver for 2 or 3 years at this point. Really nice route runner. Illinois doesn't ask him to do a lot from a route perspective. It's a pretty limited route tree, but he does um, run the routes that they ask him to very well. He's a really good whip route runner, really good slant runner, that sort of thing. And so, like, if you're looking for kind of like a gadgety like guy, which the Chargers may not need because they have Darius Davis, but if you're looking for another guy to kind of just like add on top of that, make the offense even more explosive than it already looks like it's going to be, then he's a name to keep an eye on, kind of later down the board as well. Defensive tackle Jer'Zhan, he goes by Johnny Newton, is probably the first rounder that we're going to talk about in this series. I don't think that we covered any of them last week. I Belton is close, but not really. Newton is incredible. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a first round pick. I think that he should be, in my personal opinion. I don't think that he's necessarily going to be. He got second, third round feedback over the summer and last spring, from the advisory board, which is why he's back at Illinois this season. Someone who could have declared last year, would have gone pretty high in my opinion, in what was an okay but not great defensive tackle class. Um, just an absolute dog, just like super violent player. I mean, even the picture that we picked, obviously this is a game against Chattanooga, and so you expect him to dominate, but like every picture that you could find of Newton online is like this, where it's just like him just like beating the crap out of someone. He's super powerful, but also super quick. And that translates, at defensive tackle, as having very, very violent hands, because they're coming at you with a lot of power. They're coming at you very quick. And so you get a lot of violence out of Newton. He's going to be someone that's playing more of like a three tech exclusive sort of role. Someone who I think could be in contention for the Chargers first round pick, especially if it's late. Could be contention for the second round pick, depending on where it is. A player, again, who I really like. I would really like to see him on the Chargers. I think that that defensive line looks done, but there's always room to add and tweak things here and there, especially if they do not perform to expectations this season. So someone to keep an eye on. Another guy to keep an eye on, right next to Newton, is his teammate Keith Randolph Jr., who's more of like a fifth, sixth round guy, according to the summer scouting services. He's more of a traditional, like 1-3 tech sort of guy. He can two gap if you really need him to. He's got the agility to do it. But what I really like about Randolph is his hands. He's just a really, really good technician with his hands. I think he's got one of the more advanced hand usages in the class. Um, on preliminary watch. Obviously, again, 7 months till the draft, yada yada. Another guy who I really like, if you happen to pop on Illinois' film to watch Newton because you're excited about him as a guy really high up the board, I think you're going to come away liking Randolph as well. There's plenty of plays where you're watching for Newton and then Randolph pops off the screen a little bit and you're like, hey, what's that guy doing? Taking on a double team and like, doing all this stuff. Um, Moving on to Kansas here. First guy we're going to talk about is corner Cobee Bryant. Um, Seventh round guy, according to the summer scouting this off season. He's on the Jim Thorpe watch list, the award for the best college DB. Um, did not make either the Shrine or the Senior Bowl watch list, despite I think being eligible for both games. He technically is a guy that has 2025 eligibility. I think that he might be a junior. I can't remember what year in college he is right now. With the COVID year, obviously things get a little bit confusing. But he's in, I think, either his somewhere between his third and fifth year of college. I know that he has another year of eligibility left after this. He might be one of those guys that ends up going back and taking that extra year and deferring his NFL dreams until 2025. But someone who I really like, he's Kansas's best corner. Um, yeah, just a really solid presence on the outside for them. Nothing special, nothing to write home about. Really good college player, probably going to be an okay NFL player at best. Kind of similarly with the center here, Mike Nowitzki. He's a guy who has started 45 games in college and counting. That's 45 games coming into this season. So by the end of the year, he'll be at 57, 58 games started. He's a guy that Lance Leipold, Kansas's head coach, brought with him when he got hired from Buffalo. So Nowitzki was the starting center at Buffalo for 2 years, and then came to Kansas and is in his third year starting at center for the Jayhawks. Another guy who's just really solid. For an offensive lineman, you never want to call their name too often. He's someone that is pretty much anonymous on the broadcast most of the time. Um, I think he's going to end up being a UDFA. Usually, the guys that are in college for that long and start that many games, like it's very impressive and they're very good college players, but they end up going undrafted just because they're older. They've got more tread on the tires. You've played 60 college games, and so like, what does that make what does that look like in terms of like your health? Um, so probably a guy that's going to go undrafted. I think that he ends up making a practice squad just because like he's super intelligent, as centers generally need to be. So someone to keep an eye on, could be a potential like dart throw in terms of like finding depth for a potential Corey Linsley replacement down the road, or a potential Will Clapp replacement down the road. It's just the backup guy. Safety, Kenny Logan, 6 foot 210, kind of more traditional safety build. Not a great coverage player, but just a super physical guy. Loves to hit, like would be a first round pick if it was 2007. Like just like a prototypical strong safety will like absolutely deplete a ball carrier, like triggering from his deep zone and just like laying a guy out on a run play. Just doesn't have the quicks to be like a plus coverage player. Um, you can think about like pairing him with JT Woods is like, okay, Woods is, this guy that runs a 4-3, kind of have him be the move around guy and have Logan be more of just like a traditional strong safety sort of role. I think that he's going to be a guy that kind of like slips through the cracks NFL wise, just because like a lot of those guys are getting moved to linebacker in the NFL. You see, like with the Raiders, like Devon Diablo, who played safety in college. The Jets have a guy, Hamza Nasirildeen, from Florida State, who played safety in college, that are moving down to linebacker. But those guys are typically a little bit bigger, like closer to like 6'2, 6'3, 225 ish. Logan is 6 foot 210. I don't know that that's going to play at linebacker. I don't know that it's going to play at safety just because he doesn't have the athleticism for it, NFL wise. But another guy to kind of keep an eye on is the UDFA. Those are usually the type of guys that end up making their name on special teams. And then you're like, oh, how did this guy make the roster? And it's like, oh, well, he had 12 tackles as a punt gunner in the preseason. Okay, yeah, sure. Um, And then last guy here, tight end Mason Fairchild, just a classic, like another like mid 2000s sort of player. Um, no separation ability at all. Does not generate any separation whatsoever, but makes contested catches over and over and over again. That sort of like security blanket over the middle, like slow plodding guy of just like, how does this guy keep beating us? Just like sitting in these soft zones over the middle. Um, Not necessarily a like great blocker, but I think a good blocker, someone who's probably going to have to make that kind of their calling card in the NFL. Someone to keep an eye on for the Chargers. I don't necessarily think that like he's a priority target. A lot of UDFA type players on this Kansas team, but as we talked about last week, for a lot of the NFL, like evaluations are pretty much done by the time the season starts. And so you are kind of just like digging for those more like UDFA sort of gems, which is also why we're talking about these guys so much and not like necessarily so much focusing on like, hey, Marvin Harrison Jr. had 160 yards and 2 touchdowns against Youngstown State. It's like, that's cool, but like, it's not really like we know that he's good. Everyone knows that he's good. Um, Looking ahead to this week, again, try to pick one game from each of like the four windows on Saturday for your viewing interest. So in the early window, I went with Kansas State versus Missouri. Um, excuse me. Kansas State has a really good tight end, Ben Sinnott, who I think is going to be one of the higher ranked tight end prospects in this draft. Um, He's going to have an interesting matchup against Mizzou safety Jalen Carleys, who's a Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl watch list guy. Really solid player for the Tigers there. I'm also interested to see how Sanat does blocking against Missouri's defensive ends. Missouri's got a couple NFL caliber, like fringe NFL caliber, like late round guys out on the edge that Sanat is probably going to be tasked with blocking in the run game. And so I'm interested to see how he holds up there as well. Noon ish. We've got Virginia Tech versus Rutgers. I had to do this for our friend, the other Alex Insdorf. We talked about Utah last week for Steven, so we're going to get Rutgers in here for Alex. Um, Virginia Tech's got two decent wide receivers, Jalen Lane and Daquan Felton. Lane is probably like a fourth, fifth round, like day 3 pick. Felton is a guy who isn't necessarily like super high on NFL radars yet. Transferred in from Norfolk State this offseason. Only has one catch so far this season, but I put him on here because I originally had Allie Jennings on here, who's an Old Dominion transfer who I really like. But Jennings got injured last week I think they were playing Purdue. Um, and got carted off. Looks like he's going to be out for a few weeks, which means that Felton's going to have to step up and take a bigger role. And so I'm interested to see how he does um, with that, especially because Rutgers has like a legit prospect at corner. If you are in the Guilty as Charged Discord, which you get access to via Patreon and all that, you have probably heard Alex talk about this guy, Max Melton. He's Bo Melton's younger brother, if you remember Bo coming out a couple years ago at wide receiver. Another just like freaky athlete dude, probably going to be like a mid-round pick. Someone to keep an eye on for the Chargers for sure, I think. I'm really interested to see how that matchup goes against like some NFL caliber receivers for him, kind of leading into conference play. In the afternoon slate, we've got Syracuse versus Purdue. This one was a little tough to pick just because like a lot of the afternoon games are just like very highly ranked SEC team playing like an FCS team, or like Georgia's playing South Carolina, but like it's not like particularly interesting because like South Carolina has NFL players, but like it's not going to be a good game. So I picked Syracuse Purdue here. Syracuse has a fun wide receiver tight end hybrid guy, Aronde Gadsden the second. Yes, that is Aronde Gadsden the first's son. If you remember the original Aronde Gadsden, which I do not because I was not born. But if you do, I'm sure that you feel very old, but maybe also feel very excited knowing that his son is out there running around. Um, I list him at wide receiver slash tight end here. I think he's more of a traditional tight end probably in the NFL, but Syracuse uses him as basically a wide receiver. Um, Purdue's got a safety, Sanusi Kane, or maybe it's just Kane. I don't actually know. I'm gonna go with Kane because it sounds nicer. He's a solid player. He's on the watch lists. Kind of just like one of those guys that has stuck around, gotten more and more playing time every year. Decent player. Interested to see how he does against an NFL quality matchup. And then in the late slate, UTEP Arizona, which I don't think is going to be like a great game. UTEP just got blown out by Northwestern, but they do have an NFL caliber edge. Praise Amawule, who's been on my radar for 3 years, and you could tell because I didn't even hesitate on that Amawule pronunciation. um, he's a guy that's going to be available like late day three. Injuries have kind of like derailed the last couple seasons for him. Not like anything major, but just kind of minor nicks here and there. Going to be a guy that's like available in the sixth or seventh, but is a fun player. He's going up against Jordan Morgan, who is kind of in that Anthony Belton tier of tackles in this draft class. I think he's going to be like a round two, round three guy. Has a little bit of round one hype in some circles. That's a little bit rich for me. I think he's more of a 2-3 guy, but a very quality player for Arizona there. So someone to keep an eye on as well. That is going to wrap it up for this week. I know I promised that we would try to keep it a little bit shorter, but as you can tell, I just kind of get wrapped up in talking about these guys every time. So, apologize for keeping you guys here this long. But if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. I love making these for you guys. The response to the first episode was great. I hope the response to the second episode is equally as good. Love being able to talk about the draft this early in the season. Obviously, like I said, it's a long season. Chargers probably don't need to worry about it quite yet, but also it might be over. It might be time to start thinking about it. So never too early to start talking about some of these prospects. Again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you get all of our Chargers content from Guilty as Charged. Stephen and Tyler, of course. This is coming to your feeds on Tuesday. So Stephen and Tyler are actually over on the main Chargers channel. So now you've wrapped up this, go watch that. Subscribe to them over there as well. Make sure watch Arjun on Wednesday. All the shows that we have all week. It's a good time getting into the swing of the season, feeling really good. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next week. Talk about some more draft guys. Peace.